Baroness Susan Greenfield is the director of the Royal Institution of Great Britain. A renowned expert on the brain, she talked to Sheena MacDonald about the impact of new technology on the way children's brains develop and how they learn.
You lament what you call a growing trend for technology to be used to make the 21st century child fit the classroom. Say more.
What I should say from the outset is I'm not some kind of Luddite that wants to put a hammer through all computers, far from it. But I think we should explore how the needs of children are changing. And I think that that is a very fundamental issue. And people that assume that people never change do so at their peril.
You say we need to explore that. Have you done any exploration yourself so far?
Not really, although we're starting to do this at the Institute of the Future of the Mind in Oxford, which is to explore issues. One that really interests me, for example, is why this rise in hyperactive children, for example. Now, that doesn't happen spontaneously. And one possible idea, and it's just an idea, is could it be that that coincides with the increased prevalence of IT? Could it be that when you're a young child, if you're spending a lot of time unsupervised, saying yuck and wow and pressing buttons and getting instant responses from the screen, let's say you spend your preschool time doing that, as some do, you then go to a classroom where suddenly you have to sit still for half an hour. And you've never had to do that in your life. You've been in an environment, possibly, I say an unsupervised environment, you've never had to do that. What do you think you might do? You might fidget, and then someone might call you hyperactive and then medicate you. And that is what concerns me. Now, perhaps that's not the case. I'm not saying it is. But it's just, I think, a sufficiently important idea, given the rise of hyperactivity, that should be explored. So it may be that the needs of the 21st century child should be those that require shorter attention spans, lots of visual images and icons, instant feedback and playback to responses, possibly, or not. But that's why I think issues are changing as we have an increased domination of the screen, the instant response, the limitless facts, as opposed to the hard work, the real hard work of looking something up in a book, and a book that then could be out of date.
You say the educational needs of the individual are changing. What does that mean?
Well, this might seem very iconoclastic and irreverent, but do we really see reading and writing carrying on into the late 21st century? And I hate to say that as someone who adores reading, as a person of the 20th century, but if increasingly you have voice interface computers, where you just speak to your computer, it speaks back to you, as well as this increased frequency of icons rather than words, we only have to look at texting and how that's become iconic in the way that, see you tonight and so on. You're having symbols replacing very subtle meanings and ideas. Why will you need to read and write?
Well, you're not a Luddite, but that sounds quite heretical. It will to some people.
Yeah, well, it is indeed, because the reason is that all ideas until now have been couched via the medium of reading and writing. Yeah, is liberated human civilization, as we know, from the invention of the printing press. And we were all taught that it was the printing press that did more for civilization than anything else, because it freed you up from just listening to someone telling you stories orally, in your tribe, around your campfire, to actually everyone being able to access information and piece together ideas. And it's astonishing. Also, I think it brings about a huge cognitive feat of being able to reflect on abstract concepts. The issue is it's a very different medium. The visual sense is very different from one where you are allowed to have an abstract thought, because visually you're given someone else's image already. That's why the book is always better than the film, according to us. But nonetheless, I just wonder whether that will happen in the future.
But aren't the cognitive skills needed to read and learn from and use books more developed than those needed to use IT?
Well, my own view, of course I'm biased, but I would have thought yes they are, because the cognitive feat, even beyond reading and writing, is imagination. It's being able to hold more than one idea in your mind while you're absorbing another idea. It's being able to accept or reject an idea on the basis of what you know already. This is hugely important. And it's something, yes, indeed, that one might see being jeopardized purely by unsupervised access to screens. And that's why I think we should start to ask how we're going to harness screen technologies and how we're going to use them. I really want to emphasize again, I'm not saying we should turn the clock back, but that what we need to do is access the best of IT, which is that you have infinite information, constantly updated, worldwide, cheap, easy to get at. None of these things could be said for books.
Well, now, who is best to supervise what you're talking about? Teachers are already adults. Are they too old?
No, but I think teachers should be in the vanguard of this. They're the most important people involved, in conjunction with IT experts and psychologists, and above all parents, of course, and the general public, because we are society. And the interesting issue is who decides all this, who decides what's going to happen.
Now, you called on the government to spearheads the word you used, a large-scale debate on the relationship between technology and education. How would that work?
Well, there's the idea and the reality. The ideal would be that, rather like with GM foods, there are lots of public debates over GM foods, and the public felt very strongly about it. It was discussed in the pages of the media, in town halls and so on. And I think one could almost expect or hope for something like that in an ideal world. It would be very nice to have at schools, possibly, parents' meetings after school to talk about these kinds of ideas and to pool knowledge, to pool experiences, to pool stories about what can happen. But it can only be coordinated by the government. However many exciting and good initiatives there are, like Future Lab, for example, in Bristol, the cognitive classroom, the Foresight programme with the DTI, Hewlett-Packard we're working with a little bit on a programme. But these are just small isolated initiatives. They have to be coordinated, and only the government has that amount of muscle and outreach and coordination to be able to do that. There's no private organisation can do that.
And what would such a debate enlighten or find?
Well, I think there's four questions. One is, what are the influences on young people today that weren't there 10 or 20 years ago? Now, one immediately thinks of Ritalin, cannabis possibly, certainly access to IT, and perhaps increasingly invasive technologies such as this play helmet that you can use your EEG to direct how you're learning, for example. So they're the technologies. What I would like to see first is a real scientific evaluation of the difference that they are making or not, because we all anecdotally suspect they are. But I'd like to see proof of this. Does it make kids more hyperactive? I'd like to see histograms and graphs on attention spans and creativity and imagination and literacy skills and ability to work with computers and sensory motor coordination, all the things that we care about. Where are the graphs showing the influence or impact of these influences? And then I'd like to see, at what age does this kick in? Is there a critical window after which it's not such a problem or is not that different? How many hours in front of the screen is important or not? Can you offset it by then sending them out to play cricket or not? Now, these are the things that I don't know, but I'm sure every teacher or parent might like to know. So I think that's the kind of second question. And then the third question is, what do we want? What do we want our kids to learn? Now, I think that the problem at the moment with politicians is that by definition they're short term. They're only thinking 2 to 3 years ahead because that's the period for which they're in office. And really we need people to take a deep breath and ask the very big question, in 10 or 20 years' time or beyond, when we're in the middle of the 21st century, when at the best someone like me is with their Zimmer frame, if not playing my trumpet up there. But nonetheless, what kind of skills are needed to get the current young people to be able to run society, to have a good and fulfilling life? What kind of people, what skill set are they going to need? Yeah? And once we know that, only then, fourth question, how do we deliver it? Using the technologies. And I think that is what schools and parents, educationists, computer experts, psychologists, and above all government, we should be talking about. We should be talking about these, because there's no expert on those four questions. All of us are experts and none of us are.
Well, maybe charting a worst-case scenario would attract attention. You've touched on several things: short attention span, cognitive underdevelopment, societal disengagement. You may not be a Luddite, are you a Jeremiah?
No, I certainly think there's good. There's some good things. For example, the fact that the information, and I stress it's information, not knowledge, is up to date. Those of us who had books, you're several years out of date. Secondly, people in disadvantaged scenarios can actually access, for example, MIT now, put on the web all their courses. You can't get credit for them, but you can learn. So in developing countries, as long as you have a computer, you could access MIT, which is amazing. And that would be incomprehensible 20 or 30 years ago. Again, I stress that there are some good things if it's done in a supervised way. If people are starting to think of software they can design that's interactive with the student, that achieves certain ends. But you can't just park a kid in front of a screen and magically expect some genius or symphony or novel writing person to emerge from that. It just won't happen.
I think people are beginning to develop the kind of interactive technology you're talking about. In Japan, there's something called the IQ Academy. Someone's devising brain games. I mean, do you see the new technologies as being able to provide ways of enhancing cognitive ability?
I think we have to think very carefully about cognitive ability, IQ and so on. Yes, one can become more agile intellectually, and I gather that there is evidence that the screen culture can enhance IQ. That is to say, you can see a link, or you can be very quick at... but what I'm wondering is, how divergent can you be in your thinking? That is to say, how could you see a link between something that's not there on the screen that's not a series of numbers. Could you see a link, as someone called Burnett once did, between the immune system and evolution, for example, as a grand idea? Yeah? And it's that illogical leap, as Niels Bohr once said to a student, you're not thinking, you're just being logical. That are we going to lose that amazing intuitive grasp of something, the mastering of the concepts, of the abstract concepts, because by definition a screen isn't abstract, it has a literal thing on it. The other thing I worry about is when you are actually rehearsing your cognitive abilities, you're going up and down menus, you're going through your little branch lines. And I just wonder whether that imposes on you the mentality that you have fixed options that you then play with, and you're very agile in manipulating, but they're fixed nonetheless. An IQ test is fixed options, of course. You know, you have a series of boxes that you tick, it's multi-choice.
Yes, you said you're worried about the future of the imagination.
Indeed so. The imagination is something that fascinates me as a neuroscientist, because the more you think about it, the more hard it is to grasp. When you read a novel, those characters have a persona that is so real, otherwise you wouldn't be reading the novel, that you care about what happens to them, you know, so otherwise you wouldn't be reading it. And yet if someone shows you a photo, like they'd show you the film, you feel cheated. And yet if someone said to you, describe the heroine of this novel, unless it was perhaps Mills and Boon or something very literal, where you literally she had the retroussé nose and the curls and cursed by sapphire eyes and, you know, upturned. If it wasn't like that, which most really good novels are not, you can't describe what someone looks like. Could you describe what Anna Karenina looks like, particularly? Yeah. Or what do people actually look like? You can't. But they're very real to you. And that's a skill that we acquire. We're not born like that. We learn it. We go from comics, where you do have the pictures, you know, to having our attention aided and abetted by your mum cuddling you and keeping your attention by modulating her voice. And gradually you learn to concentrate, you learn to imagine. It doesn't happen automatically.
Some teachers might be alarmed by hearing what you're saying. Are they up to these challenges?
Well, I think that the teachers they are the most important people, and I'm sure they're up to everything, and I'm sure this would be a very exciting challenge after being squashed by audits and RAEs, all the things that they're squashed to do, that this might be a way round now, working in a very prescribed way that they've had to work, to actually rise to the challenge and actually regain the upper hand over the government instead of being just told what to do all the time. Actually come back because they're the experts, they're the ones that see the children, they know what they can and can't do. They're the ones that need to advise the government now.
Well, your views have attracted quite an animated response. Has that provoked a timetable for future action?
Well, yes and no. In my own small way, we're working on the Institute for the Future of the Mind, which is on the web, which you're welcome to look up, where we are part of the James Martin School for the 21st Century in Oxford, where we're looking at the very old and the very young minds. My staff on this is one person, Dr. Martin Westwell, but he's doing a wonderful job, and I'm sure he'd love to hear from any teacher who is listening. And that's martin.westwell@farm.ox.ac.uk. And Martin would love to hear from you if you'd like to help us, because he's at the moment doing a meta-analysis of what's going on, trying to look at all these different initiatives, which as yet, to the best of my knowledge, haven't been pulled together. It would just be nice to know and have a report on all the things going on in the country. And I'm sure people would like to see that. Yeah, so that's what he's working on at the moment. And then I said I'd like to engage more with government in ways that really are for them, not me, to take this forward. One idea is that the Foresight programme at the DTI could have this as they did the cognitively enhanced classroom. I'd like that extended now to another study that they could do on the future of education. I think that'd be very helpful.